All right, joining me now is Robert Flom, managing editor of 213 Hoops. Robert, thank you so much for hopping on with me this season, man. Really excited to talk Clippers with you.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate you having me on. And yeah, I'm looking forward to talk Clippers.
Should be interesting. I think there are some interesting things and definitely some layers now as we're nearing the start of the season, and this team may or may not make a big trade that kind of affects the psyche of what this team is going to look like. But for posterity's sake, we are recording this on October 5th. If they make a trade and they decide, yeah, we're gonna throw in a James Harden deal, we may record, we may re-record, we may not. But for now, we're gonna go 50-50. That's what Robert told me before the podcast. Is like, hey, it might happen, it might not. What do you think is the most interesting thing about this team right now, Robert?
If you're not talking about the James Harden deal, um, I don't want to say Bones Highland. I would say that they are leaning into in camp playing faster. It's something I think it's kind of a common saying that a lot of teams talk about in camp. I think very rarely do you hear teams want to play slower and talk about in camp, oh, we really want to slow down. Usually it's they want to play faster. But I do think that, the Clippers notoriously added Russell Westbrook in the buyout market towards the end of last season. Russell Westbrook, notoriously, a guy who likes to run, not a guy who plays very slow, not a guy who excels in the half court. So I think with training camp, with a full season, a full off season with him, and I think he's really entrenched as their third guy. I mean, we can talk about whether that's a good idea or not, but I think if they're going to be relying heavily on Russell Westbrook, I think the idea to play fast is better. And what makes it interesting is that Kawhi Leonard, not a guy who likes to play fast, a guy who's very methodical and slow. How will that work? Are they going to get Kawhi to play faster? Are they going to try to stagger him and Russ as much as possible to have kind of two different play styles? I don't know, but that is interesting to me because it seems kind of legitimate and also seems a little contrary to what the best player on the team likes to do.
Yeah, it seems like they're diametrically opposed. If I'm being honest with you, like
Yes.
that seems like a problem when your best player doesn't want to play that style. And we've heard a lot about, hey, Paul George is Russell Westbrook's guy. Like there's some maybe different factors there in terms of who is answering to who, the styles of play, the ways that these guys want to go about it and win this season. But I do think that this team is interesting and unique. Maybe not from the key additions and key losses kind of perspective, because it's mostly a run it back kind of season for the Clippers. KJ Martin being the main addition, key loss being Eric Gordon. But it really is mostly a run it back outside of maybe you could say Russell Westbrook as a buyout addition, really changing the style of the team. How much did that affect things last year? And do you think that's a good or bad thing going forward?
It's funny you mention that because a lot of fans, I think, are not happy that the Clippers re-signed a lot of their free agents and did not make many moves in the offseason. I would say the majority are not very happy with the offseason because of
Right.
the run it back. The Clippers, were a huge disappointment last year. They, lost in the first round. They barely made the playoffs. I think they were one win, maybe two wins ahead of the play-in tournament. They played the Suns. They lost in 5 games. And yes, Paul George didn't play. Kawhi Leonard, was lost to injury in game 2. But still, hugely disappointing season. Last offseason, the talks were high. They wanted a championship. They were ready. They had their team. They had their depth, etc. Disaster. So running that team back seemed really bad. The counter argument, which has been brought up by some media people who have the ear of the organization and just by people who are a little bit more believers maybe in Russell Westbrook, is that the team did kind of blow it up at the trade deadline. They added Russell Westbrook, they traded for Bones Highland, they traded for Mason Plumlee, they traded for Eric Gordon, who's now gone. But they sent out guys who were parts of their rotation. Luke Kennard, Reggie Jackson, John Wall, Eric Gordon. Of course, they let walk over the summer. So you could argue that their team has already been shaken up. I would not necessarily agree with that. I think it is really a lot of the same team as started last season, and I don't think that's a good thing. In terms of why, I think they really do have faith in Russell Westbrook, as well as, it sounds funny, but Mason Plumlee, they went into last season not having a backup center. It was a really, really, really poor decision. And Mason Plumlee, not an all-star, but a very competent backup center who helped them a lot after the trade deadline. And I think, even if he's not a guy who will swing playoff series, is a guy who I think they're confident will help raise the regular ceiling floor of the team. I think that's why, but I also think, as we've alluded to, they are still looking to shake things up with a Harden deal. So it's a fine line, the deal, when they're like, oh, we're happy with our team, we like our team, we're running it back, but at the same time, we're preparing to trade massive assets for a star player. So, take it with a grain of salt.
I think it's fair on both sides to at least have the belief that one side is more correct than the other here, where Russell Westbrook did have some at least uniquely interesting playoff games for this team in that Phoenix Suns series, and some of them were very impactful, some of them were not so great. And then you could potentially add in a James Harden trade on top of that, and maybe that's all the change you really need if you believe in Ivica Zubac, if you believe in Mason Plumlee, if you believe in the versions of the team where, hey, you just need the right perimeter mix around those centers, and maybe you've got a small ball option here or there, and you're starting to cook with gas once you get to the playoffs. How would you think a James Harden trade, does that affect the ceiling of this team in a drastic way? Where do you think the ceiling is now, kind of with or without that trade?
Right now, I would say the ceiling is a Western Conference Finals run. It's very hard for me to see this team as currently constructed winning a championship. The caveat is, Kawhi Leonard, when he's healthy, and he seems healthy, down the stretch of last season was unbelievable. The first 2 games of the playoffs was unbelievable. When you have a guy of that talent, you can win. You can win it all. You can. But the Clippers are old. They are injury prone. A lot of their depth has aged out as well. I think a lot of their players are one-way guys. They do not really have a ton of two-way players who I think are really good bets to be solid rotation guys. So I don't love this team as a championship contender. I think the team itself probably doesn't view itself that way. I think certainly they could win a couple playoff rounds if they're able to dodge teams that are particularly bad matchups, like the Denver Nuggets. I think they could make a deep run. They actually match up really well with the Suns. Even though the Suns have more talent, I think the Clippers could absolutely beat them in a head-to-head series. They've always matched up well with the LeBron Lakers because they have so many guys to throw at LeBron. But yeah, the Nuggets, I cannot see this Clippers team beating the Nuggets. And honestly, there are other teams. I don't know how this team matches up with a healthy Grizzlies team who are just so much faster and more athletic. Luka has always given them nightmares, even though they've beaten him twice in the playoffs. So, I would say the Western Conference Finals is reasonable. In terms of a Harden, I think it raises the floor and the ceiling. For all of his playoff woes, he's a guy who we've seen also single-handedly win big playoff games. And the Clippers right now really only have 2 of those guys. You could argue maybe Russell Westbrook, Norm Powell had a 40-point game against the Suns, but in an ideal world, Norm Powell is playing, 20 minutes a game in the playoffs. He's not a guy you're leaning on for that kind of impact. So I think Harden, for all of his flaws, would raise the team's ceiling. Would it still be a championship team? I think it would increase the chances enough that I'd be more comfortable saying it. Would it help against the Nuggets? I don't really think so. But again, if you have so much firepower, if you just hit a lot of threes for a series, hey, maybe that's enough. So I'm still in on a Harden deal, depending, of course, on what the package is. I think from all that we've heard, it's mostly expiring contracts and picks for this year. That would not hurt the team much. It would help the team on the court. You could argue that in 5 years, the Clippers might really, really rue a Harden deal. It might be really bad if they don't win a championship or make a finals. But I think for right now, I think it's good that the Clippers are still pursuing Harden because they should be trying to win a championship, and I don't think this team is truly a championship contender.
Yeah, it's a lot of layers there. It does feel like this team, if you added a third guy that you can really trust to make high-level decisions in the playoffs, and he's had some moments where he put up 40 against the Celtics multiple times. This kind of guy is an impact player as long as he's in the right situation and as long as he doesn't have all of the pressure on him to create. And in LA, he would be just fine in that regard. At times you could throw the ball to Kawhi. At times you could throw the ball to PG. Or you could run some sets where, Harden is the initial distributor, but the actual goal of the sets is to spray the ball around, and he would automatically walk in as the best passer on the team. So there is some layers to that for sure. Despite all that, I still think that this team, it would surprise me if they won 50 games during the regular season, just because they are like, one, it's the injury prone factor, but the other is that there are just some layers to their defense and their offense where it can get stagnant, it can get a little bit clunky at times, that the things just don't always line up. And if you're in and out of the lineup, if you're a guy like Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, then it's just really difficult to consistently win against the best teams in the NBA that way. So they're going to drop some of those games, and maybe even they'll drop some of the games to the average or subpar teams that you wouldn't have normally expected from them. So I currently have them at 45 games won, at 45 wins. And they won 44 last year. I don't think it's that crazy to believe that it would be 45. If they got Harden, maybe bump it up a couple, 2 or 3 here or there, but it's just hard for me to see much more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's totally fair. I think in my Pacific Division preview, I think I said 46 or 47. I honestly can't remember. I think somewhere in the I think going upper 40s, if you're really optimistic about their health or some of their young guys, I think you could say like upper 40s. I completely agree. 50 seems very hard for me to see. It would be, Paul George has said he's going to play every game this year if healthy. We will see.
That sounds like a horrible idea, by the way. Like, I mean,
it does.
There are some layers to this. Like, it is okay to sit out a couple of games here or there. Like, even the Nuggets did it this last year, and they still won a championship. It's just, when you do play, you have to be better.
Yes. I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I think to some extent, I wonder if like some of the load management and injury concerns and the buzz has almost gotten to the Clippers' heads a little bit. I think for the most part, they've had a totally smart approach, which is like, Kawhi Leonard is the best player on the team. He has, we know he has lower body issues. Like his knee is messed up. We know that the Clippers need to keep him healthy. And Paul George, has not had those same kinds of issues, but he's been injured a lot. And he's also, he's entering his mid-30s. He was in the 2010 draft. He's been on many deep playoff runs. He's played a huge amount of minutes. This is a guy who you do not want playing 82 games, 34 minutes a game at this stage of his career because his body is going to break down. So, I think I agree with you. I don't think that's a good approach. And I think the key for the Clippers is, can you get to the playoffs healthy and in, an okay position? I think, 45, 46 wins, that's probably enough to get you out of the play-in, even in, I think, a pretty loaded Western Conference. That should be enough for, the 6th seed or 5th seed. Staying out of the play-in, I think, is just the top priority. As long as you're set for the playoffs, I think that's fine. Obviously, home court would be nice, but again, being very honest, the Clippers' home court isn't the best home court that's ever happened either, so maybe doesn't mean as much as it means to other teams. But yeah, I completely agree. I think 45 is a very, very reasonable wins. If they got Harden, I might be a little bit more generous. If they got him now, depending on who they set out, I might get it up to 49, but 50 is just, it's very hard to see with how old this team is.
If they did get Harden, I would seriously consider 50. But as you mentioned, there are, I think, 11 teams in the Western Conference or so that you think could really challenge for above 500 and want to be in the playoffs and really have high aspirations for themselves. And not everybody's going to be able to do that. So it'll be interesting to see. Right now, I have this team as a first-round exit. If they did get Harden, I would probably bump that up to a second round. I don't think that they're in that top tier in terms of the total playoff contenders and Western Conference contenders, but could I see this team defeating the Lakers in the conference semifinals? Absolutely. Could I see this team defeating the Phoenix Suns or the Memphis Grizzlies or the Golden State Warriors? Absolutely. It's all going to come down to health, and it's just hard to bet on the Clippers with that.
I think it's impossible to bet on the Clippers, really. And I think you've seen in the media this year, a lot of big name media people are out on the Clippers this year. It's year 5 of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. They've made one conference finals run. That was already 2+ years ago now. And I think you're seeing a lot of people have a lot of skepticism regarding them. So they could, I think, again, for them, like with any team, it's really matchup dependent. Nuggets, horrible matchup. Lakers, I think, pretty good one. Suns, pretty good. Again, I think the Suns are a more talented team. But if they got the Lakers in the first round and then got the Suns in the second round, hey, they could beat those teams. But yeah, I mean, I also think that they're not going to be done regardless, unless they really, really empty out the chips for Harden. I think that they would probably still make further moves. They really need an upgrade at power forward. I would be very surprised if they did not have interest in Jeremy Grant. We would see maybe other power forwards, but yeah, I mean, they're just not a championship team right now. Harden would get them a lot closer, but I think it's very fair to be skeptical of them compared to both the top teams in the West and just how deep the West is. Like, can they even stay out of the play-in? Who knows?
Like the idea of Jeremy Grant on that team. That would be very interesting. I could absolutely see that. But hello, I mean, it has been a great time talking to you, Robert. Thank you so much for hopping on with me. And I can't wait to hear the rest of your thoughts on the Clippers throughout the season. Should be a lot of fun.